Open your ears and lube up your butthole. It's time for the What Do We Call It podcast. Here are your hosts, J-Man and Danny, the Midwest motherfuckers.
I'm going to the ghetto to copy your face. I'm supposed to be well.
Welcome to the What Do We Call It podcast. I'm J-Man.
I'm Danny.
And this is episode 13. This is the one that we've been gearing up for with research and such, where we're talking about entheogens. And to kind of preface that, I'm just going to mention that when we talk about the substances that we're discussing, it's not normally something that we would consider a drug. So just wrap your mind around the concept that we're discussing all of these substances as just that. They're naturally occurring, and that's the mindset we want you to be in when we discuss all of this. We're not talking like drugs like, heroin or meth. Marijuana doesn't necessarily fall into this category, but it's also a natural substance. But everything we're talking about tonight is
It actually
either...
does. Pot is an entheogen too.
And I'm already wrong.
Entheogens are basically, it's a bunch of different plant
Extracts.
chemicals, naturally occurring, like you said, that have vast medical possibilities to them.
These are substances that are used in some cultures religiously, some that are used as a part of like the 60s culture to kind of reach a different plateau of consciousness, a la Timothy Leary, or someone like Terence McKenna, who utilized these substances to kind of reconfigure how his brain perceived different dimensions of reality and thought and speech and sight and sound.
Yeah, and also a lot of looking back at how maybe we evolved and looking at these different entheogens and how they played a role in our evolving. Like Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory.
I could start with that.
I think it's a good place to start.
I mean, Terence McKenna is...
First of all, Terence McKenna is like the godfather of mushrooms, right? So mushrooms has Terence and Dennis McKenna. LSD had Timothy Leary, Albert Hoffman. That's where these guys rank. Like the McKennas, depending on who you are, who you talk to, aren't an out there name like Leary or Hoffman, but they are the godfathers of psilocybin.
Essentially take those names and think of them as like the Mount Rushmore of entheogens.
Right, put it this way. Every time you've ever eaten mushrooms to trip, you got Terence and Dennis McKenna to thank. Because until they went to Mexico and found out about them, they're the ones who brought them back here.
And then did the research.
And yeah.
And reported the results.
I think they put a book out on how to grow them at home. So again, every time you eat mushrooms, you've got them two guys to thank.
So, speaking on Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory, essentially what he thought was that psilocybin mushrooms played a huge role in the evolution of ape minds when going from apes towards human. I was thinking more like run from the ape to the caveman to the next few stages to human. McKenna theorizes that the North African jungles receded toward the end of the most recent ice age, giving way to grasslands and certain sect of tree-dwelling primate ancestors. They left the branches, and then they took the life out in the open on the grassland plains. And then they were following around herds of ungulates. And then they were just kind of eating whatever they could find along the way, because now they're out of the trees and there's all these new food sources. They're kind of experimenting with what is and what isn't edible. And among the new items in their diet were psilocybin, growing in the dung of these ungulate herds. So I'm assuming he means like wildebeests.
Right, four-legged.
Caribou and stuff like that.
Grass-eating critters.
So growing on their dung, essentially, I have to imagine these had to be like brightly colored mushrooms or something that at least...
Not necessarily, but they stuck out.
They piqued the interest of these primates
enough
where they were putting anything and everything in their mouth to eat, and they did this. And what it did is the changes caused by the introduction of psilocybin to the primate diet were many. Theorized that synesthesia, the blurring of boundaries between senses. So like some people have synesthesia and they see different colors when they read. Or just the way they detect sound or light.
See sound and hear tastes.
So that caused a change to develop different spoken language. So the ability to form pictures in another person's mind through the use of vocal sound. So they developed all these new means of communicating to explain what they were experiencing to each other. And right then, boom, like a switch went off, their linguistic skills and ability to communicate increased exponentially, which then caused them to experience all the world around them totally different, both while they were under the influence of these substances and otherwise.
Think about what that would do to you. Imagine like you live with 50 people, but this whole time you lived with them, you haven't been able to communicate. You haven't been able to talk.
Other than, say, maybe grunts and stuff.
Right. Or pounding. You could probably make yourself look pissed, but now imagine being able to dictate things or share your ideas, your thoughts and feelings with the rest of these people. Imagine what that caused. Like,
a major link in evolution for those primates moving towards upright walking.
Tools. Who knows, the wheel could have been, if it weren't for the mushrooms, you might not even have a wheel.
So about 12,000 years ago, further climate changes removed those mushrooms from the human diet. So now there was another new set of profound changes in our species, and we reverted to essentially brutal primate social structures that had been modified or repressed by frequent consumption of the psilocybin. So what they're saying is the psilocybin, it expanded their minds and it kept them calm, and they were able to learn more, which kept them occupied, so they had less time competing for food and resources and interest. They were mainly taking more interest in each other than fighting over what they saw around themselves. But then once those mushrooms were out of our diet, when we were up to the point of humans, I guess Homo erectus would be the stage in development or evolution that I would just arbitrarily pick there. That, again, reverted us back to what you would see, commonly displayed, like a caveman walking with a club and they're beating each other over the head with it, competing for whatever dinosaur meat's laying there, or for space or shelter, maybe fire.
Yeah.
But that's what it did to them. And then McKenna's theory has great appeal because it is necessarily based on a great deal of supposition. But between those few actual facts that we know about hominid in early human history, he describes himself as an explorer, not a scientist. So he's kind of used these substances himself, and it's caused him to expand his horizons to just wonder what it was like for them. So all of this theory was developed upon just thought that he had from his own experiences. I mean, that basically explains it. So you think of all the things that could have triggered changes in evolution, and diet was a big one. And another thing he talked about was the change in diet. In an interview in Mondo magazine, 2000, talking about the impact of diet on human evolution. The very moment that great primate evolutionary leaps were being made, there was a transformation of the diet towards omnivorousness, meat eating. That means nothing to either one of you or I, so let me just dumb that one down. We started eating meat.
Yes, and you know what happens when you start eating more meat?
Protein in the diet, it expands the mind, it causes the mind to grow.
Gives you a bigger brain.
That's what we're hammering home here.
So you vegetarians, good luck.
So what Terence McKenna said, and I like this, I'm not saying that civilization fucked up what was otherwise a naturally occurring politically correct situation. There was a period when, because of the presence of psilocybin in the diet, the natural tendency to male-dominant hierarchies was interrupted, basically saying that they were calmer. And it was that moment that community values, altruism, language, long-term planning, awareness of cause and effect, and all the things that distinguish us were established. Then, as the mushroom became less available due to climatological factors, after like 15,000 years of human mushroom quasi-symbiosis, the old dominance hierarchy basically reared its ugly head again in the ancient Middle East with the invention of agriculture and the need to become sedentary in order to carry out agriculture. So as far as experience with mushrooms, I have none. It's a well-known fact that I am straight edge. I've never done any drugs, and even substances that are naturally occurring that might alter the mind state are something that I necessarily consider off limits because I've made this vow of sobriety. So and we discussed this like off the air before. It's like, if I tried this stuff, I'd almost feel like a hypocrite. Like, there's the thought process like, wow, what are the things that it might teach me about my perception of reality? But also, I've been in this mindset for so long, it's kind of hard to let that go.
Not only the reality, but like, it'll help you figure out who you really are too. It gives you such perception. That's why there was less fighting. They had almost a telepathic understanding of each other when everybody was on the mushrooms. Everybody was a lot more empathetic. They communicated much better.
So it was like the substances in the mushrooms relaxed everybody. They basically just chilled the fuck out and were able to coexist better because they were too busy expanding their brains.
Well, it was like
learning new things and experimenting with the new tools of communication and the way that they could perceive each other's behavior.
It was almost like a universal understanding, I think is what it is. Like the psilocybin connects everything and everybody. Psilocybin, very close to the DMT molecule. It's like one phosphorus, or it's got some phosphorus on it or something.
DMT being another chemical that Terence McKenna experimented with that had profound effects on him because of the way that introduced him to new planes of thought. So when we're referring to DMT, that it's a different entheogen.
DMT is N,N-dimethyltryptamine, and
Oh, I'm surprised you memorized that whole...
oh yeah, DMT. I really can't wait to hopefully get my hands on some
I don't know how
one
the
day.
fuck you're going to do that, but go on.
I don't know either, but apparently I missed the bus because like 2 years ago there was DMT that was legal. It was still a research chemical. It wasn't just straight DMT. It was 5-MeO DMT, which is 5-methyloxy dimethyltryptamine.
Yeah, settle down, Bill Nye, the science guy.
Hey,
People are probably scratching their head right now.
these are fun words to say. But basically, the psilocybin molecule is not that far off from the DMT molecule. It just contains different phosphor set on its molecule. So molecules are like, they're really hard to explain, but it's not that far off.
Well, basically, remember from like high school science class when we made molecules of different substances?
Right.
And it was like Tinker Toys, where there were different colored balls for the different elements,
Yep.
and then the sticks that connected them, which were the bonds between the different molecules of the atom of the substance.
Right, so basically psilocybin just has 4 phosphorus. So it's really, really close. Like, they're
In chemical
obviously all
composition.
relatives. Yeah, they're tryptamines. And like, tryptamines are in everything. DMT is actually naturally produced in your brain by the pineal gland. It's already in your head, and it's also in plants. It's also in a couple other different animals, but we all contain DMT, and we all use DMT. So as far as DMT goes, they also think that that's another universal communicator. And this is where it gets kind of trippy sounding. Apparently, this is the plant's ways of communicating with each other. And maybe even communicating with us, too. You get what I'm saying? Did I lose you?
I'm trying to wrap my brain around that. When you talk about this stuff, there's like a natural tendency to lean towards thinking about like hippies and people that are tripped out of their mind, and you're talking about, oh, this crazy whacked out shit, man. But it isn't, because all those people learned so much about themselves in the 60s with that culture, like Haight-Ashbury and the drug culture and all the different substances they were experimenting with, like LSD. Now, my own aunt and uncle are a couple of hippies, and I never asked them what they all did, but just to give you a hint, they're starving artists. They've lived in California for 20 years, and once upon a time ago, they worked on HR Puffin stuff. That's who they are. Instead of thinking of a hippie as like Tommy Chong's character from that 70s show, think of somebody who's just really fucking chill and laid back. Like, what the fuck was Jim Henson on when he came up with the Muppets? He didn't just like walk around with it. I know there was an odd inspiration for the Muppets, but it couldn't have just been, I saw something and I thought of all these weird characters. There had to be something that he was experimenting with. So think of it like that. Somebody experimenting with entheogens gave us the Muppets.
The thing, too, is with all these hallucinogens, you actually use more of your brain when you're on them. They say, how much of your brain does humans use? Like,
On average, I believe it's 10%.
so when you're tripping, you use somewhere like 13 to 14%. It's not huge, but it's enough to make a noticeable difference.
So typically, like, you're engaging different areas of the brain. And when you are on these substances, it engages some of the parts that you're already using in different ways in how they react with other, like the pituitary gland or the pineal gland. And it's amplifying their ability to help you perceive reality, sights, sounds, taste, touch, things like that. So what it's doing, it's magnifying your perception. So it's engaging more of the brain.
Well, what got me into the whole research anyway was the girl I was dating at one time. She had depression, she had bipolar, she had anxiety, and the medicines, she didn't like them. They fucked her up, and she couldn't function without them, even though she did most of the time, and ultimately is what ended our relationship. But it always bothered the fuck out of me that there was nothing I could do. Like, I just get to sit here and watch her be what I perceive as crazy, you know?
And when we talked about this, we basically had like a 2.5 hour conversation off the air that we were thinking meet somewhere. Like, I had to explain how I know nothing about this and you know so much about this. And I've never experienced this and you have. And part of when you brought up your ex was when we were discussing like our own knowledge of different chemicals. We had some good laughs about stuff like Xanax or Klonopin, narcotics that they prescribe for depression or anxiety. And then I made some crack about like how, you know, the depression drugs don't work worth the shit like they want them to. They bring them to market so fast that they have to come up with other drugs to get the full effect of what they originally wanted. And then we were both like yucking it up about Abilify, which if you don't pass medications or know about that shit, that reference is probably totally lost on you.
Abilify is the drug to help the other drug they gave you.
Yeah, so
It's the drug to make your depression drug not depressed.
Abilify is like the A1 on your steak.
Right.
And the steak is the Xanax or the Celexa or the booze bar.
Yeah, any of them death chemicals that they give you.
So what he was saying is that what got him intrigued about this was he wondered if there was anything else out there that might be able to help her out, that could help calm the symptoms, that wasn't a prescription pharmaceutical that would have all these fucked up side effects that she didn't like, that was the reason that she stopped taking it.
That brought me to entheogens, and more particularly to psilocybin cubensis mushrooms. Johns Hopkins University, over the last few years,
Were gifted a grant.
whatever, they were given money and permits to do studies on psilocybin. They were going after people who were diagnosed with a deadly disease, so they were basically terminally ill patients.
Mm-hmm.
And
And they were trying to ease the suffering.
ease the suffering and the anxiety of impending death, basically. Because obviously when you get one of these diseases, you're going to get depression with it. You're going to get anxiety from dying. And what they found was just a couple of these treatments with the mushrooms where they gave them like enough to hallucinate. They tripped them out. But they did it in a controlled laboratory, basically. I mean, it was a comfortable laboratory, so it wasn't like you were abducted by aliens or nothing.
Strapped to a gurney.
Right. It was more like being at a psychiatrist's office. You know, they had a nice couch that you could lay on, and each person had a overseer or watcher to guide them through it all. Because these were like people that weren't hallucinogen users. They were just average people who had terminal diseases.
So one of the things, you know, and I've heard this come out of the mouths of people that are family members of those with like terminal cancer and stuff, is at that point, you're going to die. So why not try whatever they're testing out? Instead of just dying and focusing on the fact that your life ends, your life is still going to end, but the research that could come from you participating in one of these studies could benefit more people with your similar condition down the road. The same way like you donate an organ and it benefits somebody once you're gone, is like the same mindset that I would have around this. And it's kind of like what they did with medicinal marijuana. That was kind of one of the first big ones. You know, and I, back in college, and this is way back in like 01, you know, and keep in mind, I still then had not yet tried marijuana ever, like I still haven't now. But okay with that guy. I had enough friends that smoked weed that I saw what it did to them. But I, for, I guess, lack of a more honorable explanation, I didn't want to get in trouble or become a burnt-out stoner like some of the people I saw that like overdid it. So I did this long, extensive project for a position paper for an English class on medicinal marijuana. You know, and this is stuff that I read positive and negative, but guess what? The positive outweighed the negative, like 80-20 or 90-10. And there's so many skeptics in my class, people that didn't smoke weed. There was one girl, because we had peer review, like she starts reading my paper, she's like, you keep referring to marijuana as an herb and a plant. Aren't there more than one chemicals in marijuana? I'm like, Jesus Christ, the sheltered life you live. And then there's other people in the class that had smoked weed that, you know, did it and thought it was cool. And they thought that it was not just like, yeah, he's fucking talking about weed. People are like, wow, this is nice that you're presenting it in a way that's respectable. And it talked about how marijuana is used to help people during chemo when they can't keep food down with the nausea, to help people that are in the late stages of AIDS because they have the wasting syndrome and they can't keep food down and they're vomiting constantly, and it relaxed them enough to calm the nausea so they can eat some food to kind of, you know, sustain them even longer.
And guess what? It doesn't have any negative side effects. You don't have to have a page worth of side effects to go with your pills.
Right.
There's virtually no ill side effects.
And a big one now that Minnesota has okayed medicinal marijuana, it's getting a lot of press about how it helps people with epilepsy.
Yeah.
Like, I know an inmate who apparently the judge, I mean, it wasn't legal yet, but before it was legal, like 3 years ago, because his epilepsy was so bad, the judge put in there, do not violate probation based solely on positive UA results for THC. So he threw in that caveat that said, what are you doing with the weed? I smoke the weed and it relaxes me and I don't have seizures as much. Cool. The judge is like, all right, I understand it's illegal, but I can see where you're coming from if you're suffering through this. And he said, if it works, keep doing it. Take your meds too if you want to. Don't necessarily rely solely on marijuana because then it seems like kind of a cop-out. But he gave him that inroad to utilize it. Unfortunately, the DOC was not as forgiving as the judge. And when he didn't have meds, he smoked weed more than he probably should have. And he got in trouble for that. But still, the marijuana itself, it helped him a great deal with keeping all of his epilepsy and his seizures in check. And there's if you watch the news when they talk about the first green cards, meaning the cards to purchase medicinal marijuana, being given out to Minnesotans, honestly, I don't remember the name, but I keep focusing on this mom who would go and testify down at state senate.
The little 6-year-old kid that had the seizures all the time?
Not her, but the one that had the daughter that had MS.
Oh, okay.
And she would give her
CBD.
cannabinol oil.
Yeah, that's the non-psychoactive.
Right.
So you're not getting stoned from that one. That one's just like CBD oil, as far as I know, is like taking Tylenol or taking an aspirin. It works for your headaches. I mean, it works more than that, too. You can already buy CBD oil as a Minnesotan.
It doesn't have the THC content is very low, and THC is what's making you
That's the
feel
psychoactive.
high.
Right.
And so what with cannabinoid oil, it's basically maintaining the homeopathic properties of it.
It's like, so chemicals usually have a left and a right hand side to them. So the left hand side, I want to say, is THC. And then one will be psychoactive and one will be not psychoactive. So the left side is your THC, that's the psychoactive, that's what you get high on. And then the right hand side of the chemical is your CBD. I can't remember exactly.
So these people they're not getting high.
No, it's like taking a Tylenol.
It affects the body in different ways. It activates different glands in the body to focus the mind to keep it from seizing, to relax the muscles from being so tensed up from the MS. You know, I wouldn't be surprised to find like Michael J. Fox utilizing some of this to help him with his Parkinson's.
Well, with him, I would be surprised if he wasn't using MDMA, because they use that a lot so I hear anyway.
Well, no one's coming straight up and be like, oh yeah, I fucking do Molly all the time and it keeps me balanced and I don't have the shakes as bad.
But that's another entheogen, even though that's not a plant. So we might have to revisit the exact definition of entheogen, but basically, entheogens...
They're not drugs.
No, there's two ways to look at them. There's one, the hippie road, which is, it'll help you be spiritual. It'll help you have inner peace, all this. But then there's the other side of the science. And there's a lot.
And how it affects the brain and the different glands in the brain and the chemicals it releases and the experiences you have. So
it's highly beneficial psychologically for a lot of people.
So like I said, I never done mushrooms. I got anecdotal evidence that I'm going to present here from a few people I know, but you talk about your own experience.
I've done mushrooms, but I've never done them. I've always done them from the get high type standpoint. It's gonna happen.
It's like, see what happens.
We're just gonna trip balls and see what happens, right? I've never gone into it wanting to get rid of anxiety, or apparently it cures addiction too. There's been people who've been able to quit alcohol through these mushroom treatments. They've quit cigarettes through these mushroom treatments. People have gotten rid of depression, anxiety, OCD, a whole litany of mental disorders through the use of these entheogens. So whenever I trip, it was the one thing I noticed right away when it comes to hallucinating is colors all get brighter. It's just, everything is enhanced. Like your sense of taste, your sense of touch, everything's just turned up a couple notches. You know, it's like, well, first of all, it's really kind of redundant to try to explain tripping out, because it's a whole other reality. It's unexplainable with regular words. Like, you just end up sounding redundant when you try to explain it. Everything's turned up 10 notches, basically.
So the people that I put out like a mass text, like 12, 13 people I'm just like, have you ever used mushrooms? You know, this is purely for like research information. What did you experience? So the first person I talked to, she said that basically like she saw light trails. She didn't get too crazy. She didn't like see weird hallucinations of anything like that. She saw a lot of light trails and she just kind of felt relaxed.
Yeah, see, that's kind of, I've never seen actual hallucinations off of mushrooms. I've never taken a large amount, but apparently if you take a large amount, that's when you'll be sitting in this room, but you'll be thinking you're sitting out in the forest type of hallucinations.
So now let me just explain what somebody sent me. So my one friend, to make it short, it was great for the most part. Start thinking about things deeper, a lot of inner monologue, lights and trippy things are very cool to look at. I totally thought when I was tripping that I was actually looking back on a past experience that had already happened. It was me and my girlfriend and my buddy and his girlfriend, and I completely thought we had made it big and were rock stars, looking back on how we started. I had this whole storyline in my head of what had happened. It was nuts. I still have some in my cupboard waiting to be eaten. And he expounded upon that with, I remember laying on my hardwood kitchen floor and thinking it was a boat. And I also took all the couch cushions and hid them because there were too many of them. And they were looking at me funny and putting them in a pile and covering them in a blanket so they couldn't see me.
See, now, here's the thing. If I was a psychologist, I would be able to tell you a little bit about that guy just from what you said. Before we started the show, I was asking, I wonder if there's a difference going into it with the mindset of just tripping balls or going into it with trying to fix something. You've heard people have bad trips, right?
Yeah.
Another thing with hallucinogens is, you know how some people say that you use drugs to push away your problems or escape your problems, whatever? It doesn't work that way with hallucinogens. Hallucinogens make you deal with the issue. So people who have a bad trip, what it is the mushrooms are causing them to have to address an issue they're having in life. So if someone has anxiety, like through the roof or whatever, chances are they're going to have what you would call a bad trip, but after the trip, they're not going to have their anxiety anymore.
So the first two people that I talked about, they went into it looking to trip.
Right.
This next person, they did it just to see what would happen. Like, her ex turned her onto it, her first husband, and says, well, after taking them, you never really feel it coming until you begin the giggling fits. Not just any giggle fits, wildly uncontrollable laughing, to the point where your eyes are closed so tight that you cannot keep them open. It was a massive trip doing them while driving. She later told me it was riding shotgun, because everything became a game in my opinion. Once the giggles begin, I've begun seeing weird animals, like the elusive pink elephant with purple spots, or misshapen animals that look like they were dismantled and then put back together all crazy like. Arms on their heads, heads on their ass ends, just legs all over the place, just weird. I'd see them either walking on the ground or flying on a cloud next to me, and no matter how hard I tried to stop laughing, I'd fixate on something else, and the giggles began again. Then I would start seeing faces everywhere, staring at me from the trees, the clouds, dirt, rock formations. They'd be so vivid that their eyes would blink. They'd smile at me, and one time I saw one blow a kiss to me. And then to me the ground felt spongy to walk on. And one time I looked down, I swear the ground fell out from underneath me, and at that point I fell over and started laughing so hard I almost peed myself.
She sounds like she had quite a few mushrooms.
Yeah, the only thing I didn't like when I came down from the high, my giggles turned into stone cold stares. Nothing felt funny anymore. My head always felt cloudy afterwards, like it was all a dream, almost like every time I asked if that trip was a dream. And I wanted to sleep or just curl into a ball. Not sure why, guess it's just my body craving more.
The hangover feeling, I think, is because all these connections are being made in your brain that night that you're not used to. It's like the way you feel after working out and you haven't worked out in a long time.
And you got that
and you go hard.
Yeah.
The next day you're fucking sore. I think that's what that is, as far as having like the headache and kind of semi hungover.
Just because you've been utilizing your brain in a way.
It's been an overdrive, right?
Right.
And then another way that they explain how this can like cure addictions is so when someone's addicted, you got all these pathways in your brains making connections, right? And in the brain of an addict or in the brain of someone with a disorder, these pathways are getting cut off, so you can't make these connections anymore. You're not making the connection that says, hey, you've had enough to drink, or hey, maybe you shouldn't smoke that crack or whatever the fuck, So these people don't have that connection anymore. But once they've had a couple of treatments with a hallucinogen, it's like plunging out them pathways, unclogging the hallways in your brain.
It's a good metaphor.
And then your brain can make these connections again.
Well done.
Yeah. I was really reaching for that one.
The last person, the only time or it really did anything was when I took them at 6 at night. I mainly felt lightheaded and had this blurry, disconnected feeling to everything I did. The problem came when I tried to go to bed. Every time I closed my eyes, it was bursts of light, like sitting in a planetarium and having each star go supernova and hit you with a piercing light. And he says he thinks he only slept an hour or two that night.
Alright, there's also different stages of visuals. There's closed eye visuals, and then there's open eye visuals. What he was just talking about right there was closed eye visuals. So when your eyes are open, everything seems fine, whatever. As soon as you close them, that's when you start seeing crazy shit. And then the more intense it gets, they become open eye visuals. So that means your fucking eyes are open and you're seeing the pink elephant in the room.
You didn't ever see Inside Out yet, did you?
No.
It's Bing Bong. Bing Bong is this fucking pink elephant with purple spots, and he's got, like, I think a lion tail. and he makes dolphin sounds in addition to talking and singing, and then he cries candy. That just made me think of Bing Bong, who was fucking awesome.
It sounds like a character that was made out of mushroom hallucination.
It could be. So some other mushrooms that we were talking beforehand, like, you know, throwing out ideas, spitball, and like pop culture. Where do you see it?
Super Mario.
Super Mario. You eat a mushroom and you grow bigger.
You can crush people.
And if you get the right kind of mushroom, you get an extra life.
Oh, yes, that's right.
We didn't think of that one before. I said the Smurfs. The Smurfs live in the forest. They live in mushrooms. And Papa Smurf's like a fucking alchemist. He's always just like sitting there taking different roots and plants and shit and giving them.
Again, there's the nature connection with the hallucinogens, with
So,
the entheogens.
Whoever in Hanna-Barbera came up with the fucking Smurfs, I'm guessing they may have experimented with some substances.
Other places that it kind of mushrooms could be, or hallucinogens, I should say, mostly mushrooms. The Bible story of the burning bush.
Ah, that's right. We talked about that one the other day too.
That
We'll rehash it, but it
the
was
burning bush was a bush that very well could have contained noticeable levels of DMT. So whoever it was that was talking to the burning bush, I don't remember who, but
Abraham,
that very well could have been a DMT,
if I'm not mistaken.
induced rant.
I've tucked so much shit I learned in Catholic school about the Bible out of my brain just so I can memorize more Family Guy quotes.
Santa Claus could be a myth from like Finland area, and the natives eating the Amanita muscaria, which is a hallucinogenic mushroom. It's a big fucking red mushroom with white spots.
Mm-hmm.
Not unlike
The Super Mario mushroom.
Yes, that's the Amanita muscaria. But they also think that Santa Claus was a big fat red guy with red suit and shit because of the mushroom as well. See how that kind of correlates, big fat mushroom and big fat Santa?
Kinda. And then I brought up, there's this EDM act. I think it's a couple DJs, and their name is Infected Mushroom. It's really cool electro music. Check them out. Check out Infected Mushroom. But let's jump over to DMT now.
DMT is a whole nother level. Like, you start out, that's like psilocybin and psilocin are like the amateurs. That's like everyday shit.
DMT
is the fucking big leagues. DMT, I've never done DMT, unfortunately. But from what I hear, it is a profound, life-changing...
What DMT did for Terence McKenna is it took everything he knew pretty much, and I'm paraphrasing here, it basically flipped his reality. So he documented his experiences with DMT, and sometimes he would see colors. He would see things trying to talk to him in like nonsensical language. And then he would perceive like objects around him almost like they were alive because they were giving off a different aura.
And he also said that each trip, it was like the DMT was trying to tell him something. But the DMT trip only lasts like 15 minutes. So he'd always say that that wasn't enough time. It wasn't enough time to bring any of this stuff back. They're showing him a universe full of information, but he can't bring
Right.
a little bit of it back at a time.
So let me jump in here with this. Now, we had the episode where I talked about my lucid dreaming. And just last night, we were going to work, but we couldn't work. You were sanding floors too late. So, and then I didn't have the laptop, so I couldn't put the time to good use. And my brain was like super amped up. So I slept for 2 hours on the couch, got up, and I was stuck up for like 3.5, almost 4 hours. When I finally fell asleep, I kind of closed my eyes but kept listening around me, and I felt myself drifting off. And then I don't know if this next part was a dream. I might have sleptwalked last night. And I know that sounds far-fetched. This is not a bit. I was laying in bed, and I could see my room, and I felt myself get up. It was slow, it was lumbering and lurchy. Now they say that your brain paralyzes your body with certain chemicals when you're sleeping so that you don't fall out of bed and get hurt. So you don't try to physically act out what you're dreaming. I slowly got out of bed. I started walking down the hallway out of my bedroom towards my kitchen. And I could feel the carpet under my feet. I felt my right leg go to jello on me at one point. I caught myself on the wall. And I was propping myself up on the wall. And I went to the kitchen and I got a drink. And then next thing you know, I'm like making my way back. And I'm back in bed. It freaked me out. I woke up. I'm like, I don't know if that was a fucking dream. Like, I know when I'm dreaming. I don't know if that was a dream.
So remember how I said DMT is produced in the pineal gland in your fucking head?
Yeah, and that's what you told me, is you think that your theory is I might have stronger DMT production than some people because of my lucid dreaming as evidence of that.
Right. It makes sense. But that's the kind of thing, like...
Felt it was like being not underwater, but imagine if you were moving in slow motion. And sometimes when you are dreaming, you'll move a little bit. Like when you see dogs moving like they're running in their sleep. That's what I think I was experiencing, only it seemed 100% real that I was slowly getting out of bed. And I zombie walked it down the hallway. It was fucking bizarre.
You're being led by the DMT. It's
so
because
like
we were talking about DMT.
Yeah, all day I was just like, Jesus Christ. I mean, I get that I was sleep deprived, but I went right into an unbelievably deep REM stage of dream. And then I don't know if it was dream or reality. Because I'm pretty good about differentiating between when it's a dream and when I have like the half-awake sleep paralysis, which is fucking terrifying.
So, you won't do hallucinogens, which is understandable. Have you ever thought about trying a sensory deprivation tank? Because here again, especially for you, being able to control your dreams,
right?
You go into this thing and apparently, well, again, I've never done it, but I really want to do it. And there is a place here in Minnesota that does it. Basically, your mind starts creating pictures and senses when all your senses are cut off. So when you're in this tank, it's filled with like Epsom salt or something like that. So you got neutral buoyancy.
Right.
So you're like half in the water, your ears are under the water, and then it's pitch black.
I hope they're plugged. I don't want water going to my ear canal.
Well, I'm sure you can plug them.
Okay, go on. Sorry.
But the room temperature, the temperature in the air is the same temperature as your skin, the same temperature as the water. So you feel nothing. And apparently after about 15 minutes of this, you start having massive hallucinations because you're being cut off from all senses. You can't define it touch. Like you're sitting on a chair right now. You can feel the chair on your ass. You can feel that it's fucking cold down here.
Right.
You can feel the headphones on, you know. Imagine not feeling anything whatsoever. You don't get that just sitting in the bed. You don't get that sensation or lack of sensation anywhere else. The closest thing to be able to getting it would be maybe space.
Right.
In
From the
shuttle.
weightlessness.
Right.
I very much felt physical sensation of
Is this-
touch during this episode last night.
Is the sensory tank something you would try?
That'd be something I'd be totally up because that
could cause you to have
natural, yeah, because I'm not using any sort of substance to alter my perception of reality. It's just how my brain's perceiving the lack of stimuli. No light, no sound, no smell, no taste. That's something I would be down for.
We should do that. That'd be fucking...
Well, I remembered another dream. Like, we were talking about dreams, and then I thought about... This is probably about a year and a half or two ago. I was having a dream. Sometimes I have these weird dreams where I'm like in battle scenes. And to the best of what I could ascertain, it was like colonial era or something. And basically everybody's looking at me. And I knew that basically it was my time. Like I was about to get shot. And I heard a gun go off behind me. I felt an impact to the back of my head, a slight one. And then I felt like the cold blood running down the back of my neck. And this isn't a dream. The way you feel water running down your neck in the shower is the way I felt what I believe to be the blood running from the bullet hole down the back of my neck in the dream. That's how intense my dreams are. I don't know why that's like that, but keep in mind, I've never used any of these substances. And that's how my brain is. So that's another part of why I'm hesitant to try them, because what if my already magnified perception of non-reality, my dreams, is magnified so intense that it's just too much. Not like it's going to fry my brain, but like I'm going to be on sensory overload.
With most of them,
freak me the fuck out.
I wouldn't really worry too much about it because it only lasts so long. You can't go crazy from mushrooms. As far as I know, you can't go crazy from DMT or ayahuasca. LSD,
Yeah, I'm never going to fucking touch LSD.
that's another story, I think. But the thing with LSD, from as far as I know, is it can bring out hidden psychological issues that you may not know you have. So, like, some people are just schizophrenic, but they don't know they're schizophrenic. Schizophrenia will hide inside them until they're fucking 60. And all of a sudden, boom, they're schizophrenic on their 61st birthday. So, if you're just carrying the schizophrenia around, but you're quote-unquote normal, and you take LSD, then the LSD can bring out that trait, and you'll have issues with schizophrenia. But then also there's research saying that it gets rid of schizophrenia. I'm not really
It's
sure
all
how
dependent
that
upon
works.
the reaction of the person who takes it. Like, what your physiological brain makeup is determines whether you're going to have a good experience or a bad trip.
Right. And a bad trip, it can still be helpful. Like, it might suck during the trip, and it most likely will suck during the trip.
But teaching you something about yourself.
Right. You're hammering out some issues. So unless you're just a fucking schizo, then I would recommend having a scientist do it with you.
So ayahuasca, what type of substance is it? Is it a plant? I don't know.
Ayahuasca is it's a brew. So there's a couple of different things working in it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it's a brew, first of all, is, okay, DMT is not orally active, so you can't just eat some DMT. It's got to be injected or smoked.
Hello.
But I think when you smoke it, you have to take an MAOI.
Inhibitor?
Right. Something like that. But ayahuasca, one of the plants that are in it is an MAOI. So it's already inhibiting your something. I don't remember.
It's changing the chemical balance in your brain so you don't experience one emotion too strongly.
Well, it's... Okay. The DMT can't be processed unless the MAOI is there, because it's not... It won't burn it or something. So when they put it in the ayahuasca, it's got the MAOI in there.
Okay.
So you don't have to take another supplement. And then it makes the DMT... Ayahuasca will last in your system longer than DMT because of the MAOI. It's not burning it out as fast.
Okay. Well, I got some info on, like, people who have consumed ayahuasca report having spiritual revelations regarding their purpose on Earth, like the true nature of the universe, as well as deep insight into how to be the best person they possibly can. This is viewed by many as a spiritual awakening and what is often described as a rebirth. In addition, it's often reported that individuals feel they gain access to higher spiritual dimensions and make contact with various spiritual or extra-dimensional beings who can act as guides or healers. Author Don Jose Campos claims that people may experience profound, positive life changes. Vomiting can follow, but this purging is considered by many shamans and experienced users of ayahuasca to be an essential part of the experience, as it represents the release of negative energy and emotions built up over the course of one's life. So others report purging in the form of nausea, diarrhea, and hot and cold flashes. The ingestion of ayahuasca can also cause significant but temporary emotional and psychological distress. Long-term negative effects are not known. A few deaths due to participation in the consumption of ayahuasca have been reported, and the deaths may be due to pre-existing heart conditions, as ayahuasca may increase pulse rates and blood pressure, which is kind of what MDMA does too. It increases your body temp and your heart rate.
Well, and some of those deaths could have been have to do with antidepressants. So
that's literally like the next thing I had.
When they
interaction with antidepressants.
Right, when you go down, because there's this whole tourism industry in Brazil now, where basically rich Americans come and take ayahuasca. So you go to like a grass and hut village, right? And they do it in these things called a yurt, which is kind of like a giant circus tent. So you got all these people in there, and then you got your shaman, who is the guy controlling it all. He's doing all kinds of chants and rattles and drums and whatever.
Mm-hmm. It's just part of the ceremony.
Right. And you all drink this brew, which is the ayahuasca. You drink it, and then you start, as far as I've read, you start hallucinating. And then some people throw it up, some people don't. Doesn't really matter. The longer you keep it in you, the longer your experience is going to be, is from what I understand.
So kind of like holding in a toke longer increases the intensity of the high you're going to get from it.
Right, which is actually bullshit.
It's nice that we were able to disprove that so quickly.
Yeah, so when they say some people throw up, that throwing up could very well be getting rid of all the other shit in your stomach too. Like they said, like all the toxins and whatnot. And then the other crazy thing about ayahuasca is, it seems like everybody's got almost the same framework of story when they come back. You know, there's people who talk about these little elves that come and fix them. And then a lot of people, once they go far enough in either the DMT or the ayahuasca, talk about meeting entities or aliens.
Well, I haven't done that yet. Well, like I talked about dreams where I've met different people and I didn't know what their intent was. Like the fucking weird dream with me and Fred Flintstone in like the old folks home dining hall, hiding out from the steampunks with the potato salad back goo that were dressed in S&M gear. Shit like that.
Right, but yours is just dreams. Like, these are all these people taking...
That's what they're experiencing while they're awake.
Right. And they all kind of just have the same... I just think that's amazing. Like, they all have basically the same framework. Like, they're all being showed the same set of symbols, being told basically the same story.
Like a collective mindset.
But that
they've
story, it
developed
can't
from
be
their
explained in
experiences.
words. So when they come back, they sound like me. Like,
Trying to describe it. Like, I don't have the words
trying to describe the
to you what I
undescribable.
saw.
Right. But 90% of the time, they changed for the better. Like, even some super skeptic people have gone down and done this and are lost for words when they come back.
Another substance I read a little about was kava, and the roots of the plant are used to produce a drink with sedative, anesthetic, and entheogenic properties. So kava is consumed throughout the Pacific Ocean cultures like Polynesia, Hawaii, and some parts of Micronesia. So kava is sedating and is primarily consumed to relax without disrupting mental clarity. So it's basically like a sedative.
I have done kava.
Yeah.
You can get kava. It's legal here.
Okay.
And you make it into a tea, and it's really good for anxiety. If you got social anxiety or any kind of anxiety, it gets rid of it. Like, it's way better than having to take your Klonopins or Xanax or any of the fucking other crazy pharmaceuticals that they give you for these things. And that's the fucking beautiful thing about entheogens, is there's
An alternative.
an alternative that doesn't have a litany of fucked up side effects.
So when we were talking about this, this is kind of taboo subject matter in our culture because it's got all these negative connotations to like tripped out hippies and people that are just off their fucking rocker talking about weird experiences they've had and trips they've had. I mean, I can understand, like for me especially, it's hard to wrap your mind around some of this, but if you approach it like, okay, someone is explaining to me what they experience, I can understand that objectively. I can approach it objectively. But where I'm going with this is, why would there be this negative perception? What incentive is there to discredit the possible medicinal or homeopathic properties and uses of something like this? It's Big Pharma. It's the pharmaceutical companies. It's just something I jotted down. Like, Big Pharma is anti-entheogens due to how their effects can treat the symptoms and conditions in a similar fashion to prescription pharmaceuticals. But that threatens the profitability of Big Pharma's products. So of course they want to shut you down and make these certain things illegal. Maybe the FDA plays a part in this, but the FDA can be influenced by Big Pharma.
And the big thing is with most of these entheogens, they'll cure in 1 to 5 sessions. Now, with pharma, there's never an end date to when you get to stop taking your Klonopin. There's never an end date to when you can get off of your Celexa.
Right.
This shit's for life. So they've got you hooked, buying this pill from them for life. With these entheogens, 3 or 4 sessions, if done properly, can cure depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive, PSTD. Did I say it right that time?
PTSD.
PTSD.
You're still doing it. PSTD. So
Yeah.
PTSD.
Anyway, they can all be cured within just a couple. And I am going to actually experiment with that. As I said earlier with my ex, she has agreed to let me test this theory on her.
Okay.
She's
What are you going to
eaten
give her?
mushrooms before,
Okay.
but again, now we're going into it with the
the
intent
mindset
of getting rid of anxiety, with the intent of getting rid of depression.
What about the kava?
I don't think she's ever tried that. I don't know. I just think the mushrooms are the way to go.
So if you think about like
And
how they're treating conditions, it's a lifelong condition you treat. Instead of one treatment, it's not a cure, it's a treatment that goes on. And I discussed my personal disdain for the methadone program because I see a lot of incarcerated offenders that are on it, and then they get locked up in a facility that won't allow it, and they come to my facility like, oh cool, I can get my methadone now. And our facility medical staff is like, no, you haven't had it, why would you need it? It's my medicine. It's not your medicine, it's your crutch. Now that you're done with dope, you got this. The same way that people will abuse Wellbutrin. But when we were talking about that, you mentioned some treatment that can be used.
oh yeah, ibogaine. Basically, it's another entheogen. I think this shit's made out of a root, and it's apparently a hell of a fucking trip. It's very intense and very unpleasant, but you can be a hardcore Scott Weiland style heroin addict Monday and be clean and sober Thursday.
Unlike the long drawn out process of completely getting heroin and other opioids out of your body with the withdrawals, and it's awful.
Without having to take
painful.
Suboxone or Subutex for the rest of your fucking life, basically.
Like, I met a chick who had to take Suboxone because she got in a car accident and they gave her Vicodin for too long for her back.
And that's a lot of people's fucking issue. A lot of people aren't out there addicted to the spike. A lot of people got it because they got injured. And the doctor fucked up and gave them 80 fucking milligram Oxycontins. And this person, you become addicted to it physically. Opiates is one of them motherfuckers. It gets you psychologically, but it gets you physically too. So the doctor's the one who gave you the 80 milligrams. And now you're sick because you don't have any. So now he's going to give you a slightly different opiate. And you're going to have to pretty much be on it forever. Or be sick.
So, with my own experience, this goes back to like '06 when I got my wisdom teeth pulled. I think they gave me like 2 hydrocodone. And I didn't want to take those. So I just took ibuprofen and I was fine. But most importantly, last year when I had my hernia surgery, and the doctor told me he was going to give me a prescription for an antibiotic, obviously to treat, my body after surgery, and then a pain med he was going to give me Percocet. And I said, no, thank you. And he went, what? You can give me a script, but I'm not going to fill it. I'm not going to take it. He's like, what do you mean? I'm just going to take IBU and ice it and just go from there. He's like, okay. I can't remember if I talked about that on the air before or if we just talked about that when we were off air having our discussion on this. But the point is that I've seen so many people go down the road of painkillers that even though obviously to treat like a surgical site scar and pain from having my lower abdominal area, just a small 1.5 inch long incision, I didn't want to fuck with that stuff. I don't want to put it in my body. It kind of goes with my straight edge lifestyle, but more or less I've seen what opioids can do to people. And that's why I gave up booze back when I did in '09, is because booze fucked up a lot of my friends' lives. They are alcoholics. My ex is an alcoholic. My ex from a few years before her, not as bad, still an alcoholic. A friend I knew died, choked on his own vomit, went to a party. He liked to just drink and drink and drink like he was a rock star. Went into a bed, they laid him down, they left him there, he went in the recovery position, and he asphyxiated on his own vomit.
G.G. Allen style.
Yeah, pretty much. But, I mean, that's why I'm so hesitant to put these substances in my body, because, like, alcohol doesn't benefit you. You're, quote, blowing off steam, but what you're really doing is getting your brain to release some chemicals to kind of de-stress, but you're kind of just distracting yourself from your problems. It's not solving your problems. Not everybody that drinks is a drunk. I get that, but it never benefited me any. And also, with the pain meds, I gotta believe that every motherfucker that was injured in the Boston Marathon bombing was probably getting some sort of hardcore pain med because they had limbs blown off.
I'm sure they still are.
Some of them, yeah. Like, I'd love to know what the pain treatment regimen was for that guy. I think his name was Matthew. He was the one that had both of his legs amputated above the knee. So he was the guy that you saw of the first few photos being rushed out of the scene in a wheelchair. And he had one leg gone, and the other was just from his knee down to where his foot used to be, just the bone hanging out, and ashy, pale as a ghost from the shock. But, I mean, people like that, and people that, like with the Wounded Warrior Project, you got all these vets that are getting injured and maimed permanently in the line of duty and in warfare. And like, what are they doing to treat them other than physical therapy? They got to be giving them something, and people fucking get hooked on it.
Well, and that's the big fucking slippery slope, too. They get wounded in battle. Not only are they going to give them now they're giving them opiates. Now they got PTSD. And they're giving them fucking Xanax. They're giving them Klonopin. They're giving these benzos that are going to fuck them up just as bad. Like, entheogens could be used for this.
So much like I've never used marijuana, but I'm very pro-medicinal marijuana. Now, and we're just the tip of the iceberg on entheogens. We could do numerous shows on this because we didn't even cover a large portion of it, but we're trying to give you a rudimentary idea because that's, other than fucking around and telling funny stories, the stuff that's happened to us, we also value the intelligence of taboo topics like when we talked about police gun violence. And we're talking about entheogens to inspire in other people. Maybe you think, I'm going to go read about this. Or maybe I know somebody that has bad anxiety and they take these meds and they hate them because they don't work very well and they're looking for another means of relieving their symptoms. That's why we're doing this. That's why it means so much to Danny, because it was something that struck a chord with in his actual life of somebody that he knew. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of those negative stereotypes about hippies and tripping out and, fucking just being a burnout from some of these substances and chemicals, like fucking your brain up. But the anecdotal evidence isn't necessarily there to suggest that they're doing that, just like how nobody's ever overdosed from marijuana.
The anecdotal evidence is actually starting to prove the opposite.
so many of these pharmaceutical companies are monetizing how they keep us alive and sane and safe and comfortable. And it's just like, it's money, money, money. And instead of having to rely on some cock-stained Jew bag from a pharma company that's trying to sell you the latest and greatest something that's better than the other latest and greatest something from a few years ago, you've got naturally occurring substances that maybe if they show enough actual anecdotal proof in testing that people get licensed to administer them. And we see this as like the next stage in the evolution of homeopathic and medicinal herb and plant applications to treat different medical conditions.
But the thing is, it's going to take like a grassroots movement of the people to get this shit out there, though. Podcasts like this and just spreading the information helps tremendously. Because look at the money Big Pharma has.
Billions and billions.
To operate a smear campaign, to keep information suppressed.
Why does the doctor give you the drug that he gives you? Because he thinks it's the best, because he's getting paid to sponsor one over the other. Yeah, I'm sure not every doctor's like, oh, just grease my palm and I'll give everybody this. I don't give a fuck. I'll willy-nilly take it.
But I guarantee there's a lot of doctors being paid by Pfizer.
And there's a lot of influence going on about this stuff. So, I mean, really think about how you can find other ways of treating it. So, I mean, I myself have certain degree of anxiety over certain stuff. Like, I probably have an undiagnosed anxiety disorder. And thinking back, it probably started when I was a kid, that I might have had OCD. I'd go to the mall, and my mom would shop for clothes. And you know how kids are like running around the racks, climbing in the racks? I had this weird tick where I'd memorize the pattern I went, and it's like to just be comfortable. I went back the opposite way. Like, I do shit like that.
I got loads of anxiety too, and hopefully I have actually already started the experimentation. There's another thing called microdosing. Mm-hmm. So microdosing is taking, obviously, small doses of whichever hallucinogen you're going with. I do it with mushrooms. So, for instance, every other day I eat a half gram of mushroom.
I did not know that.
Yeah. From what I've noticed so far, it helps me with quick thought. It helps me speak a little bit better. Mm-hmm. I got a mumbling issue and a slight stutter. And the days that I take the half gram mushroom, my words flow a little bit easier. As far as the anxiety, I haven't been doing it long enough. It could be placebo effect, who knows. But I feel like it's helping. It's just enough of the psilocybin and psilocin that you don't really notice anything until you try to look back on the day and reflect on the day. Like, are you journaling the differences? Yeah. Like, some days I get loads of anxiety. Right. Nobody really knows about it because I don't really talk about it. But little things will get me set off. Like, I'll go to reach in my van for a tool and the tool is not there or something. Right. And that can really fucking just fuck me up and throw me off for a little bit. On the days that I've taken the microdose, it doesn't bother. The little anxiety bumps that are throughout a normal day aren't even bumps anymore. So for me, like anytime I have to make a major purchase, I buy it, and I don't have buyer's remorse, but it's just like spending that money for me is a really emotionally draining experience because I've always kind of had this squirreling away, almost Silas Marner mentality about money. And it's not like I came from a family that was poor, but I recognize intelligently enough that a little bit of frugality goes a long way because you never know when your next paycheck's coming or if it's coming, so you need to have that money. They say, well, always plan ahead to have 6 months worth of bills stashed away so that if you lost your job, you could not be freaking out over it while you search for new work. Another thing is, like, having to deal with my mom, who is fucking nuts. She's just an emotional abuser, and I'm not trying to play the, oh, poor me, my mommy's mean. She is a royal bitch. She will say fucked up shit. She'll get angry about anything. And let's say that I prove her wrong. She gets more angry. And then instead of just shutting the fuck up and going to, like, stew off another room, she might go off on a 45-minute tangent about all manner of shit, and she does it out loud. You'll leave the fucking room and she's still yelling at you. You're 2 floors up and she's still yelling at you. Your mom needs some mushrooms. And then what she does when she gets super mad is she starts slinging mud, saying things like, well, you just watch, you keep that up and your daughters will end up fucking hating you, or your daughters will end up a couple of fucking drug addicts. Like, she says shit like that all the time. So I could get an awesome workout in, eat my favorite food, and then take like a sweet nap and just be on cloud 9. And we'll throw in the maybe bang or jerk off, right? But I could go over there and deal with her for 10 minutes, and it feels like I've been up for 3 days. Yeah, that's draining, dude.
Sometimes dealing with my ex is the same fucking way because she has no patience. She herself is bipolar and has an anxiety disorder, and she just flies off the fucking handle half-cocked constantly. So having to deal with that, you know, like, I probably could go and easily get a prescription for some anti-anxiety medication, but I don't want to. Another thing is I'm pretty sure I have ADHD.
That's another thing that psilocybin can help.
Like, my mind races, and if you know me, you know that I have, like, lightning quick reflexes when it comes to a conversation. Like, somebody will say something, I instantly have a metaphor or a reference or this or that, or the way I can freestyle parody lyrics. To some people's brain works creatively at a speed that's that the minutiae is incredible by comparison to others. It's just the different regions of my brain and how they've developed. But, I mean, just think of that. Like, my brain almost never shuts off. Never. I lay in bed, like last night, 3 hours laying awake. It felt like my brain was going 1,000 miles an hour. And it gets me worked up. And I can't wind down. And that's why I have to sleep with blackout curtains, earplugs. I have to do some degree of sensory deprivation or else my brain won't turn off and every little sound will jolt me out of a sleep.
If it wasn't for your straight edgeness, these things would be... You would be a great
It might be something,
subject.
you know, like, I'm not entirely against it, but I don't put drugs in my body. And some of these substances are close to drugs, so I might not use them. But I'm at least open-minded enough that when Danny approached me with this, I'm all for talking about this shit and getting the message out. Maybe it helps somebody.
But one thing I can tell you with 100% guarantee is all of this shit is safer than what Big Pharma's putting out there.
So thank you for listening to this. Chat with us on the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/groups/whatdowecallitpodcast.
On Twitter, we're at What Do We Call It Podcast. Follow us on Spreaker as well. Podomatic, yeah, it's also What Do We Call It Podcast. Spreakers, What Do We Call It Podcast. Everything, just fucking look for it. It's not that hard.
So, I am J-Man.
I'm Danny.
Finally, it's the end.